Professor, for the lecture. Just a quick two questions, if you don't mind. The model is excellent if it's in an unfrontier state environment. And the example you gave is close by heart. I come from academia, so I'm linked to higher education. Something like the University of California system, for example, where they are public, however they are autonomous as branches, or let's say as campuses. Competition plays a major role. So the example you said, good schools will have good jobs for their graduates. But let's say in Kuwait, you will get a job whether you graduate from Harvard or from a degree mill institution. So we don't have the environment that will discipline these autonomous agencies. And that's my first take on such a model. It's excellent if it works in an under-tier environment. Second question, don't you think at the end, because we are frontier state, the fact that there will always be a bailout from the state. So let's say Kuwait adopts this model, and we have 5 public universities with endowments, etc. One of them, due to bad management, fails. I can guarantee you that there would be a bailout from the government, because no Kuwaiti, or let's say no Kuwaiti population will be fired and will not be bailed out from the government. So that's my biggest, let's say, take on that model. And I can see that in a frontier state will be a matter of pre-packaging. So it's a new public sector. I understand the concept, it's excellent where it creates more efficiency to the public sector, but in an frontier state environment. So these are my 2 problems for the question.
Thank you. So my question is actually related, and I mean the first part is more conceptual. So let's assume we have the government sector now that's very inefficient, very bloated, very bureaucratic. Are you basically suggesting that they should take certain functions, or let's say as many functions as possible from this bloated government sector, and then just let that bloated government sector, I don't know, atrophy, die off, get all the bad talents, basically be bloated? Is that and continue to be bloated? Is that kind of the framework that we're hoping for? And then follow up from that, I mean, as you've mentioned before, as Stephen Hertog has mentioned before, once you have these islands of efficiencies and you try to apply them elsewhere, like for example Saudi has tried to apply them with reforming the labor market, and once you have a lot of agencies that sometimes overlap between each other, they start competing with each other and they start blocking each other, which has happened in Saudi, for example, when they've tried to reform the labor market. And I mean, if you try a similar thing, maybe it would also happen here, that you'd start having bad competition, I guess, in a way, and you'd lose the whole point of having a coherent bureaucracy that is able to manage from above all the different sections. And similarly related to that is in terms of the labor market, which is the most kind of, I guess, important for citizens. Is this seems to me to be creating a third labor market, if you want, where you have the government labor market and then you have the private labor market. So where does this fit in? Would basically be government sector employee wages be paid here? Would it be more towards the private sector? How would it fit between those two? Because then it's basically, my question is more around the competition that would be created and the kind of different segmentation and how they would be coherent with each other. Because this seems it tries to be government but also private at the same time, and it's playing on those two. So just the contradictions that arise from that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that areas, but it doesn't matter because you are offering jobs to everyone. So somewhere the people will need to be parked, okay? Whether they're parked here or there, it doesn't make much difference. As you say, it's repackaging. So it goes logically that you would have to stop offering jobs to everyone. At least, stop offering good jobs, or stop offering rapidly jobs. Keep them in the door for a while, and once it's clear that there is a very desperate case, then offer something which is not a desirable job. It's a bailout solution. So I think that has to be the case, and obviously also the autonomous agencies need to be autonomous in that sense. The jobs, the pay, the career, all of that has to be in accordance with private sector practices, not in accordance with typical civil service bureaucratic structures. Where you are promoted by seniority and paid in accordance to fixed scales and things like that. If you have no discipline in enforcing good behavior and good returns, the system does not work. And I think this is true even for private enterprises. One of the problems we face is that the banks, which caused the financial crisis with their recklessness, are not being sufficiently forced to change their management. Some of the same people who were there on top of the banks in 2007 and 2008 still are there. So they should be called to account. This is never perfect, but there should be ways in which it is done. And I submit to you that it is done because occasionally people are relieved of their functions, and this is true in all government, including in this region. Now, it should be more systematic and especially more objective, in the sense that, and that's where the benchmarking is important. You should know what is expected of you, and everybody should be able to see that you have not delivered. And therefore, we love you very much, but thank you. You can have another job where I'm not saying, I destroy you, but you have another job that is of less responsibility and less importance.
I think we're about to wrap up if we don't have to be. I would like to add something which reflects the views of Kuwait Economic Society that applies to the questions of both gentlemen. I think because Dr. Lutchani stressed upon the endowment, I have to say that it is not the sole defining factor of the model. The model assumes a prerequisite of good governance, similar to what we see in the private sector, and totally unlike the anomaly we see in Kuwait now, where there is probably an over-regulation on the private sector and under-regulation on the public sector. We're talking a sort of an equilibrium where we strike an intelligent balance between the public and the private sector in terms of good governance, in terms of the introduction of a meritocratic culture. Sometimes we talk about small projects as if it was the magic word for the youth. This is not the solution. The solution is even if they work in ministries, you have to introduce a meritocratic culture whereby those who excel are rewarded and those who do badly are punished. And this is the sort of prerequisite that we assume in the model, I think.
Yes, I mean, if that is not there, of course, you destroy the incentive. I think it's very important to have the incentive, especially vis-à-vis the youth, the younger, well-educated people. And that, let me say just one thing. I really believe that the human capital is there. Your pessimistic view about the availability of human capital, I disagree. I know so many bright people who are frustrated because they are not given enough responsibilities, and they don't have a chance to show what they are able to do. In the past, there were more chances, more opportunities than there are now. The danger today is that society is becoming a bit immobile and not allowing young deserving talent to really emerge. That's very good.
I think we're about to wrap up. One of the last questions, Dr. Nasser.
Professor, this concept, can you show us some feedback that you have had from any of any of the countries around?
Well, as usual, people want examples and ask who has been doing this. And the answer is, in terms of decentralization, we have many examples, of course.
In the regional group.
Well, in the region, I can point to several examples. It's not done systematically, okay? But there has been a pattern of creating institutions, in endowing institutions, ranging from the special credit institution, financial institutions that were created very early in the process. I'm particularly familiar with the structure in Saudi Arabia, but stuff like the Saudi Industrial Development Fund, the Authority for Wheel in Yambo, all of these things are examples of institutions that have been, in some cases, not in but supported by regular transfers, which I think is a mistake. But they have been created on the purpose, and they have different. An example of a university that has been endowed is King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. Now, I don't think this has been done, as I say, systematically. But what I'm saying is that you should do this more systematically, and the government or the strategic level of thinking in the government, which should be separate, in my opinion, from the day to day, should systematically engage in this kind of thinking. What is it that is today done by the government that could be done by a separate agency if we take it up? The pattern of creating autonomous agencies has been too much ad hoc. Sometimes you create one, sometimes you don't create one, sometimes you create agencies that have very ill-defined mandate. If you want an example of an agency that, in my opinion, has been given a wrong mandate, it's again in Saudi Arabia, the King Abdullah City for Atomic and Renewable Energies. Okay, that's an agency that is,
I think
ill-conceived, if I may.
We need to wrap up at 8:30, otherwise the catering company will take back its full.
Okay.
So we allow Dr. Bassam Ramadan to take the last question from the audience.
I didn't hear you talk about privatization, privatization.
Yes.
Probably expected from the back, but I mean, in a country where, basically, all the signals are wrong, encouraging public sector employment and discouraging private sector development, where economic diversification is critical. Why are we going for autonomous agencies? Why not identify specific sectors and public utilities that privatize, correct the signals in the market, and ensure that the market goes in the right place?
Yes. That's the way, this is most frequently presented.
Now the war begins. World Bank and academia.
No, I mean, again, I have a flair for saying stuff that is controversial. So just as I attacked
That's okay.
I will tell you that I'm not a great believer in privatization. Because privatization has been working and working well in some instances, but not always. There are certain prerequisites for privatization. First of all, not all kind of functions are correctly carried out on a for-profit basis. So what we are talking about here is containing the size of government and current expenditure, so you have to include functions that cannot be privatized. And secondly, in order to effectively privatize, you must be sure that there is a private sector that has the resources, the capital, and skills to run the privatized industries. If I look back to the past 30 years, I can mention to you several examples of disastrous privatizations, beginning from Russia, if I may. Instances in which public assets have been sold, disposed of in ways that are not transparent, not legitimate, and not effective in the end. So, yes, privatization is one aspect of this, but I claim that what I'm talking about is more general and more applicable in terms of presenting the story. It is a mistake to always present it as privatization, because people will say, why should I necessarily give this task to entities that are private, therefore do not have a public interest in mind? You see what I mean? So it depends. In certain cases, you may privatize. In other cases, if we're talking about corporations, Kuwait Airways, I don't know what. I mean, those are corporations. They can be privatized and so on. But if you are talking about schools, universities, and so on and so forth, I'm not.
I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, Victor.
No, they are not exclusive. They are not exclusive.
Okay, finish up with this end. This is, I promise you're going to be the last one.
So if you privatize, let me add one point. If you privatize, you are not adding, you're not using your oil money to create a pool of investable funds, equity, potential equity. You need to create the endowments in order to reinforce the ability of the system to carry out investment. You see what I mean? Yes. Last.
By mentioning, first of all, thank you for your presentation. You have an excellent point of view, and I really appreciate that model. But I just have one question. By saying autonomous agencies, do you mean independent bodies that have the power to govern their own policies in their respective areas? Okay, if that's what you mean, then it would be hard to adopt this type of model in Kuwait, because here in Kuwait we have independent corporations like national corporations, KNPC, KOC, and other state-owned oil companies that don't have the power to govern their own oil policies. Oil policies in Kuwait are governed by the Higher Council of Petroleum, which is headed by the Prime Minister. So eventually, everything is governed by the government. So if what you're calling for is having all subsidy policies governed by independent agencies, then someone in the crowd mentioned that the previous governments had difficulty facing public pressure to diminish some subsidies and cutting them back. So if you were to create a public or endowed agency that has the power to govern its own policies with this type of area, then I'm assuming that it would fail in Kuwait, because the government wouldn't have the decision-making power to govern these things, and the government in Kuwait, we're living in an area which enjoys its power, a government that enjoys its power. So the government in Kuwait enjoys governing all its policies. So it would be very hard for the government to create independent bodies and consider meritocracy. If we were to speak of meritocracy, then the government wouldn't really put someone in charge that has a graduate degree or a doctorate. They'd put someone in charge that would listen to them and do their bidding.
Okay. Here, I will point to Norway as an example. Because it is the appropriate example. Of course, the Norwegian government determines the oil policy of Norway. It's the Norwegian government, but they have a company. They have created a company. It's called Statoil. They own 70% of it, 30% is on the market, so they decided that, of course they control Statoil, okay, but they don't interfere with the decision making of Statoil. They control it as owners of 70%, they appoint the board, they appoint the CEO. That's it. Then, they judge out of the performance of the company. They don't tell the CEO what he should be doing. They don't tell him if you need to invest more than $1 million, you need to come to me and I have to sign for you to do this. No. At the same time, they also allow foreign companies to invest, so there is a competition and they can see who's doing better. Is it the foreigners or my national oil company? So they have a way to judge whether the national oil company is doing well or bad. So you have to be clear about the difference between the level of dictating a policy, which is a broad policy, a set of principles, and the level of day-to-day management. The fallacy is to believe that, if you are in charge of everything and everything needs your signature, then you will be able to control everything effectively. It's not true. That's when you lose control of things. You have the impression of being all-powerful, but in fact you lose control of things, and especially you lose control of the ability of formulating policy, simply because you are signing pieces of paper all the time and too busy with day-to-day.
Okay, I want to thank Professor Lوتشياني for this presentation, and I want to extend special thanks for our audience who have always demonstrated a strong brain power and impressive questions to the extent that I'm beginning to feel that we have our own virtual think tank. What do you think? Thank you very much. Thank you.